Welcome back to Corbin AI. We do daily artificial intelligence videos for your personal and business life. And you clicked on today's video because you want to see how you can start accessing APIs of softwares for any type of software. And we're going to show you how to do that today. Now, the reason I have a poll behind me is because we're going to be focusing on a software that was requested by one of our followers here. So we go ahead and put out these polls ever so often, asking you as a viewer essentially what you want us to do on this channel when it comes to API or just anything in artificial intelligence automation. If we scroll down here, the software we're going to be using today is going to be Jotforms. So we're going to be going full depth, everything you need to know about Jotforms, but don't click off yet. The reason we're showing Jotforms is that what we're about to show you and the skills you're about to learn, you can apply to any type of API documentation you plan on implementing in your business or other clients' businesses. Now, with that being said, this is probably going to be one of the most valuable videos we do on this channel, so make sure to watch the entire thing. I cannot stress this enough. Being able to do the skills we're about to show you right now is going to be tremendously important for any type of business that plans on doing automation for their backend or clients' businesses. Understanding how to leverage the skills we're about to show you in this video is going to be tremendous for you. So go ahead and leave a like for the value. Let's go ahead and jump in here and start off with the platform we're going to be using to showcase these skills, which is going to be Jotform. Give a little bit more context right off the bat here. Essentially, we're going to show you how to use ChatGPT and a specific plugin here and essentially talk to that specific plugin with ChatGPT so you can do the skills that we're about to show you for any type of API documentation and essentially, be very comfortable with this kind of framework. So from here, let's go ahead and scroll down here. We can see the limitations that we have access to when it comes to Jotforms. So we go to triggers and actions. We have the ability to do 5 different things for Jotforms. But as you see here, we have the ability to also do API request. So what's nice about that essentially is this is going to give us the ability where every time we want to do a function that's custom and not shown as one of these, we don't have to give an authentication token. So what I mean by that essentially is some apps within Zapier doesn't provide an API request. Essentially, you just have to do webhooks and then provide, if I can speak today, an authentication token in order to access it. In that context, you're looking at a lot of webhooks. Let me know in the comments down below if you want to see a more in-depth video on that topic. For this video specifically, though, we're going to be looking at apps that integrate with Zapier but are limited to its ability to do certain functions, triggers, and actions, and really utilizing this API request beta. This is going to be really easy stuff once you understand the process here. So now that we understand Jotforms here, for this video, I went ahead and created a Jotforms account. So as you see here, a free account here. I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Let me go ahead and create a free account here. What's nice about Jotforms is I'm going to be able to still access its API with a free account. And here we go. We are in Jotforms here. Perfect. Let me go ahead and come over to Zapier here. Let's go ahead and add it as a connection. Let's do Jotforms. Here we go. It's going to say no to both of these. I'm going to say yes, continue to Jotform. I'm going to hit allow. And we should be good to go. Perfect. We are in. So now we have it connected. So essentially what this means for us is that the authentication token, whatever the context may be, is always going to be active. So we can always call upon this. Let's go ahead and create a new Zapier and start messing around with Jotforms API documentation. I'm going to go ahead and move this over here real quick. So we have our backend right here. Now we have the API documentation right here. So let me go ahead and show you how to find API documentation for any type of app here. Come to Google, type in the app you want to use access the API for. So for us, we got Jotform here. So I'm going to do API documentation. And then it's going to be our first option here. So some apps don't have the ability to do API documentation. They gatekeep it. Either it's a private or essentially you just have no ability. So keep that in mind. But from here, we have access to the API documentation. Now, a lot of times, if you're already natively integrated into Zapier here, as you see here, if it's already here, you don't have to worry about, let me go ahead and close this out here. You don't have to worry about the authentication part. This is essentially what Zapier does for you. So we essentially know exactly who we're talking to, and we have the rights to even access that API. Now, in that one situation I was describing earlier, where essentially you're dealing with just a bunch of webhooks, this is more important as we'll need to add this in the headers. For this video, though, we don't have to worry about that. We're going to essentially use this API documentation and ChatGPT here. Here's the secret key. We're going to use GPT-4, and we're going to use the plugin of WebPilot. Why are we using WebPilot? WebPilot is going to allow us to essentially grab the data found on this web page. Now, there's multiple ways to approach this. Some documentation that's like more, rather than like a long list like this, could be better because you don't want to front load GBT too much. But in most contexts, what you can do is you can kind of start by loading ChatGPT and letting it understand what the situation is and what we plan on doing. So I'm going to come back over to ChatGPT here. And we're going to say we plan on using Zapier and Jotform API. Here is the current documentation. Now I'll be 100% transparent here. Entering in this link, it's not going to be able to grab everything here. I mean, that's a lot of information. But what we did there is we did two main things. First thing we did is that we identified we're using Zapier. So now it understands that we're working in the realms of Zapier. We're not using other platforms when trying to access the API. The second thing is that we're giving it context of what type of API we're dealing with here. So in this context, we're dealing with Jotform. So that is two main functions here. From here, though, let's go ahead and start messing around with some of the actions here. So a lot of times what an API call is essentially is going to be where you're essentially using a webhook in Zapier, or in this context, we're going to be using a natively integrated API request. So in this context, we can only do it as an action. So let's just say, for example, so we can just start accessing the API request. Let's go ahead and change this to scheduler. We're just going to go ahead and just say every day. I'm going to continue here. Just choose some time of day, midnight, for the night owls out there. Hit action here. And then let's go ahead and add our Jotform block here. So now that we've added our Jotform block here, this is where API request becomes very important. So we're going to hit API request here, hit continue, and we get all this information. So what's nice about Zapier is a lot of times they'll provide you a direct link to the docs. If they don't, the alternative solution to that. From here, though, as you'll see, you have a bunch of different information when it comes to what you can do with the underlying API, right? So the way that this is organized pretty nicely. The way that they have it organized is, user, form, submission, report, folder, system. And what you can do essentially is, let's first understand what each of these mean. So for example, when it says Git, essentially what Git means is that we're going to be going into Jotforms, and this is for any context, right? This is unilateral. So if you're using Calendly, YouTube's API, whatever it may be, if you're doing Git, all that means essentially is we're trying to grab data from their backend and push it towards this backend. That's what Git means. If we are doing an action of post, that means that we want to use information that we created in our Zapier here, or make whatever automation solution that you're using, and we're pushing it towards Jotforms backend. So just passing data around, those are going to be your two main functions here. There are some use cases where you're going to use other functions here. As you see, we have different HTTP methods here, such as get, patch, put, post, delete. A lot of times you're either using get or post. I've had contexts in the past where you use a function like delete. So delete essentially is if I'm trying to delete data within a backend. A context this works in for business is if I'm using Stripe API and I want to delete a subscriber that is not paying their bills, and maybe you did a follow up, they're still not paying. All right, let's go use an API call to delete them in your backend to limit the access to that subscription service. So that's an example there. From here though, let's just go ahead and show you one of these so you can kind of get an idea of something very simple here and kind of proceed from there. So let's go ahead and create a sample data here. I'm just going to create a form here. Let's use a template. Let's do new customer registration. And then from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go from there. Let's see if I can just real quickly just publish it and give some sample data. Okay, let's say open a new tab. All right, am I going to be able to submit? Perfect. So I'm just going to go ahead and input some information here. Tom, address. Okay, you want my last name? Tom Adams. And then address. Let's just give a random address here. Let's just give this address, shall we? All right, 702, postal code, Houston. Now I want to show you the whole process here so you can understand exactly what we're doing here. So there is no empty space. Phone number 0000000. Go ahead and call that and you'll be able to talk to me right away. And then, newspaper. Let's just put, I love what you do. And then suggestions for any improvement. Please, if we just do no improvement, I guess. And then, yeah, okay, submit. Perfect. So Submission received. Okay, so we got our data point. We have a form here. Let's go ahead and see what it looks like in the backend. I'll be completely transparent. I have never used Jotform before, so I'm figuring out their UI right now. So we do have the form here. We got one submission as well, and so we have some data to play around with. Nice little Excel sheet looking thing, and we can kind of go from here. So let's go ahead and do our first. No, I don't want to give you that. Let's go ahead and do our first function here using an API request. And I'm going to show you how to do a ChatGPT so you can really understand, if you are completely new to this or you have some experience, how to start leveraging it. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this to API Showcase. And then what we're going to do here is let's go ahead and change our trigger to the sample data we just created here. So we have some stuff to play around with so you can really understand how, like, intricacy wise it works. Pretty cool stuff here. So we're going to say new submission. I'm going to continue here. The form we're going to be doing is new customer registration form. Let's go ahead and test this trigger. It should give us that data we just created together here. Perfect. And let's go ahead and do our first function here. So I'm going to come back over to our API, and let's just say this is really simple. We're going to get more complex. Don't worry. But let's just say we want to do something like we go to the form section here, and we want to get the questions associated with a form. Even though, yes, I know it does show up in that test data. We're going to do it together, so you can have a very simple form or simple idea of how to do this. So we're going to say, okay, so because of the fact that the way that this API documentation is structured is like this, it's like a single page. I'm going to go ahead and load the data in manually rather than use the web pilot due to the fact, let's go and reload this. I just had to reload that, and now it all shows up here and understands. I'm going to go ahead and load the data in manually because I'd rather do that than say, hey, look at this link, find this specific function we're trying to do. That's too much information for it to handle. Now, in the context of your API documentation, like you've seen in YouTube's API, notice how it's single page, where essentially if I clicked one of the specific functions, it would bring me to a single page. I could load that URL. That can expedite processes. This is just a little bit more manual. So let's go ahead and just proceed with a little bit more manual. So what you want to do essentially is give it context. We're going to say, okay, we are going to use a Zapier webhook to do the following in Jotforms API. Now, the reason I say I kind of did a little too premature. Let me go ahead and stop that. The reason I say Zapier's webhook and not a API request is because we're just going to identify that essentially we don't need to authenticate, as you'll see here. So we're going to say we're essentially going to provide all the information, right? So we're going to provide this information, and then we're going to go ahead and copy this. So copy all relevant information. If you have no clue what you're doing, this is why I'm showing this, because essentially what this is going to allow us to do is you're going to be able to talk to it. So we're going to go ahead and say save and submit here, and let's see what its first interaction is here. So as you see here, it's already telling me to set up a Jotform API key. We don't have to worry about that. So essentially what that means in that context is like, oh, they haven't authenticated. They don't have an API key. We do though, because we use Zapier. So what I'm going to do is please provide the answer again, but we do not need to authenticate. And you might be saying, oh, why don't you just take the answer how it is and then ignore that part? Because if you truly are going to speak to this API documentation for a lot of time, let's try to get the best outputs possible so we don't have to deal with all this additional information essentially. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and do that and rephrase the answer out here. And essentially now from here on out, it understands, okay, because we're using Zapier, we don't need to authenticate access to this API. Let me just give you exactly what you want to know so we can get better answers when we do maybe more complex API calls and we don't want to get too confused. So from here, it says set up webhook. Understand that this is a version of a webhook. Essentially, it's just we authenticated, right? So from here, though, let me go ahead and see what it says, right? So it says, okay, based off this API, you want to do a GET. Okay, GET. We're trying to grab data. We're trying to grab the ID. They're trying to grab the questions, right? Then, as you see here, we have the link. We're trying to get it from the URL. Come back over here, put the URL in. Then, as you see here, let's see what it says. So replace form ID with the ID of the form you want to fetch questions from. Okay. So the next question might be, I don't know what the form ID is. I don't know what the form ID is. Don't worry. You can find it right here. So whatever the context may be, sometimes you have to call upon the previous input data. Now, it actually seems like they don't provide the form ID. This is interesting. So we might actually have to do another custom call here. Let's see. Okay, it does. Okay. For a second there, I was like, all right, this is getting a little more complex. Let's do another thing where we have to do a whole other search query. From here though, let's go ahead and provide that. So what we can do is let's go put it there. There may be a situation where we have to create string parameters rather than how once it's structured here. It really depends. Let me go ahead and see if I can just find this here. There we go. Let's type in form ID. Let's hit continue here and test this action. So we did get an error here. And if you get an error, what you can do, and this is actually really good that I'm showing this live because, you know, you deal with webhooks, so you're going to deal with this, right? So what you want to do is you want to go to the underlying output that shows the error. So in this context, it says you're not authorized to use form ID in question. So two things pop in my head. The first thing that pops in my head is, okay, do I need to be on a higher plan in order to access this call? Because some API calls require higher plans for specific platforms. And the second one is maybe there is additional authentication that I'm not aware about in this API. So coming over here, I went ahead and asked about this error. And supposedly within this documentation, we do need to obtain an API key and we do need to provide it. So let's go ahead and do it. It says, go to my account. Let's go to API section. My account. See, this is part of the problem too when you're dealing with a new platform. You don't know where necessarily everything is. Okay, API. Let's create a new key. I'm gonna delete it. So you can go and copy if you want to. But so we got all these different accesses. You always want to do full access if you're going to do a lot of complex stuff here. So I'm going to do that. And then let's go ahead and jump back over here. And I guess maybe we do need to authenticate this. I mean, I'm glad this happened. Honestly, everything happens for a reason. I'm glad this happened live. So you can see essentially, if you have an issue, this is how you troubleshoot, right? So let's come back over here. And essentially, supposedly the header's name is going to be API key. This can change. Sometimes it's authenticate and the bearer tokens and stuff of that nature. Let's go ahead and see if this works. If this doesn't, we'll find out why. And there you go. You just saw a troubleshoot live. Leave a like for the value. But yeah, so essentially it works now. As you see, if you come down here, I mean, to be honest, the structuring is a lot of data, right? But you know, let me just see if I can find where it says success. So. But as you see, I mean, all the data's here, right? So the street address, these basically we were asking for the underlying questions found in the form, right? Right here, newspaper, so on and so forth. So now, as you see, we do not run into an error like we did before. So I guess keep that a note that essentially sometimes even when you have authentication with Zapier, you need to provide additional authentication. And, you know, honestly, this makes a lot of sense. I remember running into issues with Twitter's API where it wanted me to add like 3 different levels of authentication on top of already Zapier's integration, right? So that's a pretty good lesson to learn right here. So now we understand that even when you're integrated with Zapier's backend, you still need to authenticate on some level. And guess what? We use ChatGPT to troubleshoot it. I mean, I have never used API documentation from Jotforms before, so I wasn't even aware that this was actually necessary for their documentation. This shows you the power of ChatGPT. Imagine the amount of forms I would have had to went through on Stack Overflow, on their whole backend to understand that the simple thing that you needed to do was just provide further authentication. Pretty cool stuff here. All right, so let's go ahead and show you another way we can go ahead and use this API documentation. We're going to do the example of getting a submission ID. We're going to simply just go ahead and put save and submit here. As I said before, provide as much context as possible. So we're providing all this context, providing the context here. One thing I want to point out on top of what I've been pointing out that's pretty important here is you want to make sure, actually I don't even need to scroll down like that. You want to make sure that when you are calling upon API documentation and you're using Zapier, you are under the right way of calling upon the API documentation. We're not using all these other ones like C#, Ruby, Java. We're using C URLs. This allows us to do HTTPS requests and so on. From here, though, let's go ahead and change our scheduling event here. We're going to change it to Jotform when a new submission occurs here. I know the data is provided again, but I really just wanted to show you an example of how to leverage API documentation with ChatGPT. This is pretty powerful stuff here. So we're going to hit continue selected record here. We're going to come back over here. As you see here, what we need to do is do a method of get. So we're going to go ahead and grab this URL here. I'm going to change this to get. Make sure we have the API key. As you see here, In theory, they should be automatically added, but it seems like with this documentation, we still need to add that API key here. And then essentially we can come back over to ChatGPT here and provide the submission ID in the underlying URL here. So we're gonna come right here, we're gonna do submission ID. Now, essentially the point of this specific API call is to get all the data associated with that ID. And as you see here, let's see if it works. Seems like of this type of calls, it will tell us right away. So success. And we should get all the information we needed. Yes, we did. All right, perfect. Another use case using ChatGPT and API documentation. All right, so you have really learned how to use ChatGPT, connect it with the API documentation, combine those two worlds, and really start doing more complex stuff when it comes to automation. Let me know if you want to see a tutorial showing you how to do it if that API request beta isn't an option and we have to do it by straight raw web hooking and setting authentication and that whole shebang. Let me know down in the comments down below. If you feel like you learned something, make sure to like the video. It's completely free and it helps us here at Corbin AI. If you want to learn more about artificial intelligence and how to leverage it for your personal and business life, go ahead and check us out here. Go ahead and subscribe. We do daily content really showing you how to leverage this new technology in a lot of different contexts. I'm going to go ahead and link a playlist here that just shows a bunch of different softwares you can start leveraging in your business. We do a bunch of long form content on these topics. So we're going to show bot press, voice flow, Make, Zapier, just everything you need to know, the fundamentals of how to get started. But without further ado, I'll see you in the next video.
Thanks for tuning in. And yes, surprise, I'm an AI avatar. Make sure to explore more here at Web Cafe, where we demystify AI for your personal and business life. Until next time.